We just implemented a new feature, the ability to select a period, so we have to write a test, not only to make sure it's working correctly, but to make sure it continues to work correctly as we refactor and expand our application. So what we're going to do is start off with a new test block. We're going to say it updates the period when clicked. And the first thing we're going to do, as with all tests, is mount our component. And what we're going to do now is we're going to assert that today is currently selected because we want the default period to be today. So we can just go ahead and use expect. We're going to say wrapper.findAll. And remember, we're using these data test attributes to make sure that in the future, when people add classes or IDs, they don't change this particular one since it's exclusively used for testing. We're going to find the first element, which is going to be today. And we're going to use the classes method to grab all the classes on that method. And we're going to assert that it contains is active. If we head over to our test runner, I'm just going to say yarn test, and we're going to run all of them by default, and just with the watch flag, so everything is updated automatically when I save. And if everything goes as expected, it's going to pass, and there we go. Before we go on, I'm going to do a quick little refactor. Just looking at this line here, it's quite difficult to see what's going on. So I'm going to extract this out into a variable, and hopefully it's going to be a bit more readable. I'm going to say const today. And the reason I'm using this $sign here is just to represent that this is a DOM element. Using a $sign to represent this goes very far back from the jQuery days. So now if we say today.classes, it's a lot more clear what's going on. If we save that off, everything should continue to pass. And there we go. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to find the next period, which is going to be this week. We're going to click on it, and then we're going to assert that the class is updated correctly and that today has had its class removed. So the first thing we're going to do is just find that element. We can just use this one, and we're going to say this week, and that's going to be the second element in the array. Now what we need to do is click on this and assert that the classes have changed. And the way we can simulate an event is by saying this week, and we're going to say trigger, and that's going to trigger a new event. We want to trigger a click event, and then what we're going to do is first expect that the classes have changed. So it's going to be today should not have the active class anymore. So we're going to say not contain. And then this week should have the active class. So if we go ahead and save this off, let's see what happens. So things are actually going to fail here. And this is a little bit confusing at first. You can see it was expecting not to contain is active, but it actually returned is active. So it's failing on this line here, the very first expectation. The reason is a little bit complex, but it's quite important to understand if you're serious about Vue.js or if you're serious about JavaScript at all. So what's actually happening here is Vue updates the DOM asynchronously. Instead of updating immediately every time something changes, it will wait for a certain number of changes to occur, then batch update the DOM all at once for efficiency and performance. The test runner, however, is synchronous and has no idea that it has to wait for the DOM to update. So what's happening here is we're rendering the initial DOM up here on line 12, and then all of this code is running synchronously without waiting for the DOM to update. So by the time we hit these expectations down here, Vue hasn't had a chance to update the DOM or change the classes. So there's a lot of ways to handle this, and the main one is to do something called a wait next tick. And what this is going to do is just wait for Vue to have the next tick or the next frame of rendering, and then we're going to get the updated classes here. You can see we're actually getting an error here, and that's because we're using the await keyword inside a function that is not asynchronous. So I'm going to mark this with the async keyword, and that will make the error go away. It looks like this wasn't imported correctly, so I'm going to type it again, and there we go. So if I save this one off now, after this trigger event occurs, it's going to wait for the DOM to be updated, and then we're going to make these expectations, and you can see that it's now passing. So that's a little bit difficult to understand, but it's going to come up a lot throughout this tutorial. So if you don't understand it right now, just keep with me and you'll see it more and more, and eventually it will start to make a bit more sense. Anyway, we've seen that is working correctly, so let's go ahead and make the final assertion, which is when you click on this month, that this month classes are updated and this week is also updated. We can actually copy this because it's going to be quite similar and just paste it down here. And we're going to have this month now, which is going to be the last element in the array. Then we're going to click on this month, and we're going to expect that this week now doesn't have those classes, and that this month does. And if we save that off, everything should be passing. And there we go. So this is looking pretty good, but there's actually one more small improvement we can make. You can see that every time we trigger an event, we have to use await next tick, which gets quite verbose and you have to add a lot of extra lines to your code. What we can actually do is use a shorthand, which is just to call await on the trigger event. Any event or method in Vue test utils that causes the DOM to re-render, like trigger, it's going to return next tick. So then you can simply call await this week.trigger click. I can now remove this and do the same thing down here. And if we save this off, everything should still be passing. And there we go. So this was quite a fast video, but there's a lot of content we covered. We looked at a lot of different things. One was simplifying your tests with variable names. And most importantly, we saw we have to use await to await for the DOM to update. And we also learned that test runners are synchronous, unlike Vue, which is asynchronous. If you didn't understand this, you're going to see it a lot more, so just keep with it. And if you ever find your tests are failing because the DOM hasn't been updated, you might want to try doing await next tick just to ensure that everything has finished and Vue has had a chance to update the DOM.